Hi, so we're entering now the final section of our study of this philosophy of sex and love and friendship. And we're turning now to the philosophical movement of the 20th century, mostly called existentialism. We're not going to specially study existentialism as such, but we're going to look at some figures, especially the writer John Berger. But we're going to look at a number of figures who all identify themselves as existentialists. And basically what they mean by that is that they're drawing on the ideas of the very famous 20th century philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. I'm not going to talk with you about Sartre's philosophy specifically. I do have other lectures on YouTube, so if that's something you want to find out about, which I recommend, you might look at those lectures. But what I want to do is just very briefly try to tell you sort of like the very simple idea of what existentialism means in that context, just to give you a little bit of orientation. And then I'm going to talk this time a little bit about the great writers R.D. Laing and Simone de Beauvoir. Laing is an amazing writer in the area of psychological health and mental illness and so on, and I highly recommend studying his work if that's an area you're interested in. And Simone de Beauvoir, is one of the most powerful writers ever in the history of feminism, and her great book, from which we're just going to read a tiny little selection, the introduction, her great book, The Second Sex, is really something that every adult in the modern world should read. So I strongly encourage you to move on to that when you get the opportunity. But I'm just going to use a little bit from each of them to introduce some of these core ideas of existentialism as a context for now moving into our main study, which is going to be John Berger's book Ways of Seeing that we'll begin looking at in the next lecture. But anyway, let me start just by saying roughly what existentialism is. So existentialism is a philosophy oriented towards grasping our distinct character as free beings. And so that's where existentialism takes its start, from the fact that we are free. And what it does is ask, like, what is the distinctive character of freedom? And what implications does that have? And has lots of implications, goes all over the place. But the core of it, and the thing that people usually think of when they think of existentialism, is the idea that because we're free, it's up to us, each of us individually, to make our individual lives meaningful. Right? The meaningfulness of your life doesn't come prepackaged, but you kind of have to figure out what your own life is about. That's in the simplest way that I can think of. That's what I would say existentialism basically is. That's the idea that it puts forward. And so that idea is captured in this famous sort of slogan that from Sartre, the idea that existence precedes essence. And what does he mean by that? Well, if you think of other kinds of animals, camel, cat, shark, ant, whatever. Basically, we think of them as coming with their life form kind of pre-packaged, right? There's something that it is to be a cat. There's something that it is to be a shark. And each cat that's born, each shark that's born, is basically going to live out that form, that life form. And so his trajectory is already sort of laid out in advance. So with those other ones, you could say in a way they have an essence. There's an essence of cat, which basically defines what a cat is going to be. But you don't have an essence. Insofar as you're a free being, you got to make your own life meaningful. So when Sartre says existence precedes essence, he means the primary thing about us is our existence as free beings. That's what we are. Who you end up being is going to be something you realize through your choices, through your values, through your actions, and so on. So your existence, your free existence as a choosing being, precedes your essence in the sense that what you are isn't already there. It's something that you bring about by your choices and so on. So another way of saying that is, I guess, the human being is a who, not a what. And so in a way you could say that's that's really the central idea of existentialism. It's the idea that each individual is a who, and that's what the philosophy is about. It's about grasping the distinctive character of a who. So you should recognize that point right away as the point that Laing makes at the beginning when he says, there are two basically different ways you can recognize a person. I mean, there may be even more, but he emphasizes two. You can encountering another person, you can experience that person as an organism, a biological organism, which each of us is, a human being, or you can experience that person as a person. And what he really wants to write about in that selection from the divided self is that basic distinction between the person and the organism. So each of us is an organism, right? We're biological functioning beings and so on. But what it means to be a person is to be, going back to that thing we were just saying, is to be someone who is a perspective, someone who has their own values, right? You see things a certain way, and it's not automatically the way someone beside you sees things. And so for you as an experiencing subject, the way things matter to you, the way you experience them, is all shaped by the core values you have, the core sort of decisions you're making about who you are, about what you care about. So there is, and this is another version of this idea that existence precedes essence, or equally you could say we don't have an essence, right? There is no universal answer to the question, what is the meaning of this for persons, right? Not everybody likes the same thing, not everybody wants the same thing, because each of us has to figure out for ourselves how we find things meaningful. So he's writing there in the context especially of psychological care. And he's really, highly critical of much of the established institution of clinical psychological care, because he says to a very high degree the institutional practice of psychology is pointedly built around not recognizing persons as persons, but about pretending dishonestly that persons are just organisms. And so he's complaining about the way the unique meaning-giving powers, responsibilities of individuals are not taken seriously in a lot of institutional psychological care. That's the larger point of what he's doing. I'm not going to pursue that. It's a thing you can think about, you should think about. But the core point he wants to make, whether that's true or not, the core point he wants to make is you're not really recognizing another person for the thing that she or he or they are if you're not recognizing them as someone who does and who has to live out that role of being someone who's figuring out for him or herself or themselves what they consider to be meaningful and who they are, right? So he says that on page 22. He tries to say in a simple sentence what it really means to recognize the other as a person. That's a version of the thing I've already said. He says, the other as person is seen by me as responsible, as capable of choice, in short, as a self-acting agent. So that's the key thing that he's saying you really have to recognize about another person to recognize them as the person that they are. And if you were to go on and read this book, The Divided Self, one of the things he does is look at lots of quite familiar practices that people engage in dealing with each other, where they're not really respecting the other as a person, where they're not really acknowledging the autonomy or sort of self-defining character of the other person. So that's the first point I want to get from Laing, but then I want to move on to a second point. So he's then, in his book, he kind of studies what it what it takes to become a healthy person, to be able to embrace that experience of freedom. And his point basically is that human beings live in an essential kind of dependency upon other human beings. Like we already saw a version of that in Freud, when Freud talked about the child growing up with the parents, and he talked about how the child's psychology is significantly motivated at very early stages by this notion of fear of the loss of love and so on. And one of the big things Freud emphasized was that the phase of a child's developing experiences of independence essentially rests on a phase of the child's developing secure experiences of dependency. And those experiences of dependency have to be secured for the child for those explorations of independence to be able to work, right? Well, Laing is basically making in this book a very, very similar point. He similarly is saying, like, you have to learn how to inhabit your own freedom, and to be able to do that effectively, you really depend upon the support of others. So we've just been talking about what it takes to recognize another person as a person. Well, he says for the child to grow up into inhabiting that experience comfortably, that child has to have grown up being recognized as a person by those others who matter, specifically parents. So in Laing, in his book, talks about that in terms of what a concept he calls ontological security. And basically that means that as a child, you grow up and start to develop a sense of yourself as a free being. Well, first, basically, he wants to say a real being. Like you have a sense that, oh, I'm real. And he says, what does that mean? Well, it means that you matter. It means that you're a real piece of reality, and what you can get things done in the world, and that's all important, right? Now, you looking at any being might think, yeah, that's just an obvious factual truth, and it may be. But Lang's point is, to experience yourself as that is different from simply having it be a factual truth about you. That may not be an issue for a cat or a dog. I kind of suspect that it isn't. They're just going to do their thing. But for a person, how you perceive your own reality is essential to how you're able to live, right? And so, though you are a real free being who can do things in the world, it matters that you learn to see yourself that way and to have a secure sense that that is so. And so he says, when you're growing up, you really need people, parents basically, but others too, to give you feedback on yourself that basically confirms your sense that you matter, confirms a sense that you are capable, confirms your sense that your choices, your desires are worth something. I'll give you one word to capture that in short. You need others to confirm that your subjectivity matters, that your subjectivity has weight. So, and when we say you're a who, not a what, that's another way of saying that is you're a subject, right? So Lang's point is that the child who's growing up starts to develop a sense that it's real, and the core to being able to be an effective free adult is that you got to get that sense secure, where you can live from a confident sense that you are a free subject whose perspective matters and who is capable of doing things in the world. So that's really, so he's carrying on the same kind of thing that you were seeing in Freud when Freud was talking about the stages of development that the infant has to work through, the issues that the infant has to deal with, and the importance of the supportive or not supportive in bad context, but the importance of the supportive parental context for how that's going to develop and for having it develop well. So Laing is doing that same kind of thing, and the thing he's emphasizing is that through all of those developments, the core issue is, are you being confirmed in your sense that you as a perspective, you as a free center of experience, matter. So that's what he says is the core to the foundation for a healthy development. And his book is really about the psychological problems that we have precisely when that doesn't happen. But I'm not going to pursue that further. You may very well want to, and I recommend it. This book that I'm taking the selection from, The Divided Self, would be a great place to go with that. But all I wanted to do was to bring out that idea then, first of the difference between the you as a person versus you as an organism, you as a who versus you as a what, and then to bring out this idea that you're part of what it means for you to be a who is that you have a sense of yourself as a subject, and a sense that you as a subject, are real and that you matter. But that sense of the being secure in that sense of yourself is the crucial development a free being has to go through. And establishing that ontological security then is the thing that we really need to have happen in our development, and that's what we're then depending on other people for. So now I just want to take that idea of the experiencing yourself as a who versus a what, the difference between those two, and the idea that we need to be supported in our efforts to securely establish that view of ourselves. I want to take those ideas now over to reading the introduction to de Beauvoir's Second Sex, specifically now to think about that issue, which is, an issue of profound personal importance for every person, every individual. I want to look at how de Beauvoir takes basically that issue and looks at it at a social level, right? So basically what she wants to say is, in our contemporary society, and indeed in society for a long time, there is an established way that women are actually inhibited with respect to developing exactly those kinds of healthy self-experiences. So she wants to talk about how our society establishes a kind of gender roles, basically, kind of established rules for understanding what a man is and what a woman is. And the very meaning of woman is in a way sort of designed to run counter to the what it takes to recognize someone as a who. So her introduction is really just basically introducing you to the idea of woman, right? So many people in our society grow up understanding themselves to be women, and she's basically asking, what does that mean? And her point is that as that word functions in the realities of our social life, that word is not a biological word, right? So sometimes people treat woman and man as words that mark out a biological distinction, and it may well be that they do, but that distinction does not define the meaning of woman as it actually functions in our social world. And so to grow up interpreting yourself as a woman has a lot more embedded in it than just the biological role of producing the egg in the context of reproduction of the species and so on. And so that's really what she wants to explore. And the particular thing she wants to emphasize in this introduction, and the point I want to bring out, is that the roles, the socially defined roles of men and women are not equal. Even though, like I've just said, this man and woman are two different socially defined roles, she says, even though that's actually true, that's not the way it really functions. That's not the way it really seems, because even though they're both roles, only woman is in a way seen kind of like a role, in the sense that the very meaning of the role man is that it's what defines normal. And so So men get to grow up thinking we're men, and that means, oh, we're persons, we're who's, we're normal, and the and women are put in the position of being the second sex, as the secondary sex. Women are not men. It's not. It's not logic. Even though logically speaking, you could say, well, isn't it also the case that men are not women? Yes, logically you might be able to say that, but sort of experientially, that's not the case, or that doesn't matter, because men, according to our sort of cultural definition, effectively just are what it is to be persons, and so women are not that. So women in that way are always put in the position of being defined in terms of a role and a set of values that they're also defined as not being equal to. The core thing she's wants to say is that in a significant way in our culture, and this, she's saying this remains true in a contemporary culture that, sort of officially announces that everybody's equal. She's saying even in this sort of liberal culture that would never officially say that women are inferior, she wants to say there's still very, very powerful ways that women are put in this kind of subordinate role, and basically it's this thing I already said, right? That women are defined as the second sex. That is to say, person is essentially equated with man. But then in that context, there are all kinds of ways in which women are essentially defined as objects. And so I want to actually read just basically the last thing she said, because that is the key point. And I think you will see that it connects with what we were saying about Laing. So this is on page 17 of the newer translation. It's on page 27 of the older one. I'll read from the newer one. She says, "But what singularly defines the situation of women is that being like all humans, an autonomous freedom, she discovers and chooses herself in a world where men force her to assume herself as other. An attempt is made to freeze her as an object and doom her to immanence, since her transcendence will be forever transcended by another essential and sovereign consciousness. Women's drama lies in this conflict between the fundamental claim of every subject, which always posits itself as essential, and the demands of a situation that constitutes her as inessential." What I want you to hear there is exactly then the point that Laing was making, right? That every subject feels itself as essential, and it's crucial to our development that we have that fact about ourselves acknowledged by what's outside us. But she's saying that at a social level, women are defined as inessential, right? So that the thing that Laing would say is essential for establishing ontological security, right? In a crucial way, that's sort of what's denied in principle for women at a kind of cultural level. And then the thing she said right before that is, the woman discovers and chooses herself, right? That's that same theme of existence preceding essence. Like we got to find ourselves and make our lives meaningful and so on. But she chooses herself in a world where men force her to assume herself as other, not the thing that is defined as the normal real thing, namely man. And then it's the thing right after that that's important now. She says, that means an attempt is made to freeze her as an object. So that's the thing, and then I want you to think about the relationship between this idea of that challenge of feeling yourself to be essential, but having your situation define you as inessential. The relationship between that problem and the idea that you're being defined as an object, not as a subject, which you can associate with what Laing said about experiencing the other as a person, is experiencing them as a freedom, as someone that chooses for themselves. So that's really just the simple set of issues that I want you to hold on to here. I really was just trying to bring out that idea of the sense of what the who is in the context of this existentialism, and to think about what it means to recognize someone as a person, and to think about how for women the very experience of assuming for yourself the identity of woman brings with it a kind of challenge to the healthy experience of yourself as a who, and particularly in association with this idea of being experienced as an object. So if you have those ideas in mind, that's going to set you up very well for what we're going to go on to do now in looking at John Berger and his basically existential approach to sexuality.